Good evening, everyone. All right. Welcome, Anne-Marie and Craig and Hahn, our all-star cast of panelists are joining us. Welcome to TigerTalks here on November 30th. Really exciting panel that we'll introduce in just a minute. But let me introduce myself. I am Don Seitz with some fellow classmates in the room as well from the class of 79. Gotta love it. Gotta love it. But they're very charismatic. I have the wonderful opportunity and responsibility at the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council to manage a number of alumni engagement initiatives, of which TigerTalks is one of several types of programs of this nature that we put together.
I'm making it a you.
And so it's always wonderful to come to New York to do this and get lots of alumni and friends of alumni in the same room, and also several students. We actually have, I think, 10 or 12 students with us tonight. So I encourage you, particularly at the networking reception, as alumni, to engage with the students and vice versa. Really, obviously, a dimension that makes these events even more intriguing. We also have Colleen Burris and Tracy Myers from Corporate Engagement and Foundation Relations. PEC and corporate engagement work very, very closely together to put these kinds of events together and others, of which we'll actually talk about some later on. So just before we move to the reason we're all here, I just wanted to give a very quick overview of entrepreneurship, both on campus and across, eventually, the world. I'll move out of the way so people can see this. And I won't talk about all the aspects and dimensions that entrepreneurship is taking, but it's really very broad and rapidly growing. So there are a series of student-facing initiatives that are managed and run by the Keller Center, and then there are a number of alumni, community, faculty, student ecosystem initiatives that are run by PEC. And those include events like this. They include a mentoring program that I encourage you to get involved with, either to be mentored or to be a mentor in a flash mentoring type of arrangement. And there's a number of funding initiatives as well, highlighted by something called the Alumni Entrepreneurs Fund, of which folks here have been recipients of, and Lauren Bender, where's Lauren? In the back, leaning up against the bar. Just a classic venture capitalist kind of person. Lauren manages that fund. The most recent panel selection that just occurred, and we now have how many companies? 25 Princeton companies funded with convertible debt up to $100,000 of matching funds. So it's a great way to sort of launch your business. So for the young alumni, because it is a young alumni program, if you are interested in that, please talk to Lauren. So I said it's been very busy. A couple things just to see what's happened. We had a previous TigerTalks back in September at Yext. We had a wonderful conference, the first ever alumni, actually we called it the Tiger Entrepreneurs Conference up in Boston last month. About 200 alumni attended. We brought faculty from Princeton. We had panels or speakers across tech, life sciences, arts, social, and sports enterprises. And we just had a fabulous, fabulous time. And hopefully we'll take TigerTalks to other parts of the country, and we'll bring conferences to other parts of the country as well. I mentioned the AEF panel that Lauren just ran, where that 25th company was funded a couple weeks ago. And then we had a really wonderful event in Princeton on campus called Celebrate Princeton Innovation, where we, PEC, awarded 4 Tiger entrepreneurs with awards. So enough of that. I am delighted to both, one, thank WeWork, who graciously provided us this space today. They're a great partner. I bet there's lots of Princetonians that are actually working in WeWork's co-working spaces. They obviously just, as you probably know, acquired Meetup yesterday, so they're becoming a very, very significant player across the spectrum, and they also made a really interesting investment in a company called Wing, which is a women's focused facility to help with all kinds of needs for women, but who are also entrepreneurs. So I thank WeWork, and I also thank our moderator, who's my colleague, Anne-Marie Maman, class of '84, who I will pass the floor to, and she will be moderating this evening's panel.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. So thanks for coming. Tonight, the topic is life sciences, and I thought, especially given our panelists, really the intersection of data science and life sciences and how that is changing things, what the future brings, and what types of changes are currently happening because of that, in funding, in iteration, and things like that, as well as looking forward what types of changes it'll bring for precision medicine and types of things like that. What I'm particularly proud about is how the three of you really embrace and exhibit the ecosystem that we are really trying to develop at Princeton. So Shahram is teaching at the Keller Center. He has a class on finance, entrepreneurial finance. He's also a venture capitalist, and he also has a startup. Hahn, a postdoc, no, not a postdoc, a PhD graduate alum, works on campus in the Small Molecule Center, and also is the very first tenant. He's a founder of a company which has just been announced as the very first tenant of our brand new innovation center that's opening up on January 2nd. So they'll be moving in. And Craig is a early career founder who started a company. He has received AEF investments. He's also received BioAdvance investments from Shahram's group, which sort of brings that around. Shahram, I'm hoping with your startup, you're going to be applying for space at the Innovation Center to be perhaps the second tenant right after Hahn. And Craig, maybe you'll be in there as well. So sort of the ecosystem of faculty, of alumni, of early career founders, of mid-career founders, which is great that, that we have that in this blend. I thought maybe we could start with just giving a few minutes of background of each of you, yourself, and especially sort of what your life sciences piece is.
Sure. You want me to start?
Please.
Thank you for the introduction. So Shahram Hejazi, as Anne-Marie mentioned, I teach a couple courses at Princeton, and I also have my own startup, a biotech startup, which we raised seed funding last year through a venture firm in the UK. But I spend most of my time as an investor, as a venture investor in early stage health-related technologies, and that's very broadly defined as health. So the fund that I'm with, BioAdvance, invests about 50% of the funds in biotech and about 50% non-biotech. The non-biotech includes digital health, diagnostics, and devices. We've been around for 15 years, and I've been with the firm for 10 years. I lead most of the non-biotech investments. So WellSheet, Craig here is one of my recent investments, which we categorize as digital health, but we invest in about 5 to 6 companies per year. We are a seed fund, usually about $500,000 to about $2 million per company. We're usually the first investor, trying to really bridge the gap between the academic or early stage technologies to where a Series A would come in. Just one of the statistics I want to give you is that we invested in 50 companies over the time. And in fact, Anne-Marie used to be the CEO of one of our companies. I have to say that very early on. So we've invested in about 50 companies, a total of about $40 million, and that $40 million has brought in about $2.7 billion of additional capital, either in forms of co-investments. So we co-invest with most of the big VC firms in the country, and/or just acquisition. So that's a number we're proud of, and we continue to invest. We're currently investing out of our third fund, a $50 million fund. So that's where I spend most of my time, but I think that's a good introduction.
My name is Hahn Kim, as Anne-Marie said. So my relation to Princeton, as Anne-Marie mentioned, that I'm currently the director of a small molecule screening center, which Princeton initiated the program about 4 years ago. I'm the founding director, and the core mission of the screening center is to enable the cutting-edge biology developments at Princeton using small molecules as chemical probes and discover new exciting biologies and enable them as they translate into potential therapeutics. And the Crescenta portion, which is the company that will become the first tenant at the Princeton Innovation Center, is basically having a core thesis that many of the metabolic diseases are born out because of dysregulation of fatty acid metabolism. So we have identified certain targets that are directly related to fatty acid metabolism, which can be targeted as for disease modulation. And basically, we have come to a stage where we have now positive proof of concept results in both fatty liver diseases and also the Alzheimer's. And one might argue that how can you have positive results from a same chemical both on fatty liver and also Alzheimer's? And we think we are differentiated in this class because our underlying biology basically unites what seemingly is a very disconnected biology. So we are very excited about that science progressing. And at heart, I consider myself as a scientist, so I'm not as well versed maybe in the business side of things, but something that actually does unite the small molecule screening center that I'm involved with enabling the science that's happening at Princeton, and also the Crescenta is all the education that Princeton had allowed me to pursue. Basically is putting together these very cutting edge science, coming together and providing opportunities so that we can come up with novel treatments that is very going to be beneficial going forward. So.
Hey guys, Craig Limoli. I graduated from Princeton in 2012, went on to work at IBM as a strategy consultant in their Watson Health division. While I was there, I saw some of the failures in technology in meeting physicians' needs, especially around, there were great innovations in analytics and new technologies that Watson was bringing forward. But specifically being able to provide those to physicians in a consumable format that meets their workflow and actually provides value to them on a daily basis was something I felt could be improved on. I then lined up my MBA at Wharton studying healthcare management, where I used it completely as a launch pad for the business, WellSheet. And that was a great experience. Met my co-founder there, MD, MBA, and we set off to launch the business while in school and then work on it over the summer between first and second year in the MBA. Got some really strong traction that summer, some federal grant. And so I'm a proud Wharton dropout. I continued to work on the business rather than going back for my second year, and been working on it for a couple of years since that time. It was mentioned that I got investment from the Alumni Entrepreneurs Fund, which is only for young entrepreneurs. I'm no longer qualified for that, so technically now I'm an old entrepreneur.
It's early career, not
yeah. Okay, that's a good term too.
Just sort of to set the template for what we're thinking about doing, I thought I'd ask a couple of questions, about 3 questions, and hopefully each of you will add a different piece to the question, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions. So hold your questions for a little bit, and then we'll come back to you. So my first question is around data science and life sciences. I thought you could talk about some of the unique challenges that data sciences adds on to the life sciences. So life sciences is highly regulated. It doesn't necessarily allow for much iteration after you've gotten to market. Data science is much faster, adds a whole level of complexity, regulatory reimbursement perhaps, manufacturing, as well as an iteration, because it allows for iterations. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the unique differences, maybe some benefits, some drawbacks to what data science is bringing to life science.
Yeah, I can start, and I also just realized I didn't really describe what WellSheet does, so I can
Yeah.
start with that and parlay that into the data science space. So essentially, our technology improves electronic medical records for physicians. We use machine learning to predict what physicians need to know to treat particular patients and surface that in a much more user-friendly format for them. And so the UI layer is a really intuitive interface, but it's driven by an intelligent backend that has a lot of kind of new data science related elements to it. And I would mention that data science in particular is challenging, especially machine learning, artificial intelligence for early stage startups. Given the amount of data that you need to process in order to create valuable models for the market. And so that's a challenge, and I think especially so in healthcare, where data is hard to come by with the regulatory environment. And so our strategy has been to focus around the areas in which we can provide workflow support to the physicians, allow them to engage with the technology in a meaningful way, and continuously optimize our models over time based on their interactions. And so it's a self-learning model where we're actually, in addition to the data we've acquired from our customers and from publicly available sources and strategically acquired sources, we're supplementing that with that user data, which gets better and better over time, and we're strategic about how we acquire that.
Yeah, well, I would actually sort of take a different approach and answer your question in a different way. So I think we are really in the age of biology and data science, and we're seeing the convergence of these two for the first time. 25 years ago, when I did my PhD in engineering and data, I published one of the very first artificial intelligence papers, and then I did a postdoc in biophysics and medical school. And when I go back and look at those things that I published, they look like they're centuries old. Really, we have gone so far, especially in the last 5 years, when it comes to data science and biotech. That's unbelievable. I would say on the biotechnology and life sciences, we have tremendous amount of data we've had for a while, but now we do even more. And the data science is finally to a point where it is able to enable us to utilize it in a way to help physicians and help the whole healthcare sort of world. So I see them both as more converging rather than being divergent and different. Certainly from a regulatory perspective, anytime you step into the life science and biotech, you are governed by FDA from a regulatory perspective. But I think that's not necessarily bad, frankly, because that gives us a discipline to be more careful about what we create.
I guess where I sit, which is very, very early, so I guess the anecdotal story is that even the target that we're right now working on, there were a lot of data from the clinic which had argued that this target would be a very good target to work on as it relates to originally atherosclerosis. But then the very basic science behind it, the data was very scattered. So one of the things that we, at least to some extent we did, was try to just connect all the dots. So kind of to Shahram's point, I think there's a lot of data out there, and to some extent, at the very early stages, what's lacking is how you actually make the connections. And I think that's where, let's say, the platforms like, where WellSheet could come in, or something of that sort would be, how do you enable connection of all these dots with all these accumulating data per se? And I think and also which then would allow, like, as you look down the regulatory pathway, especially FDA now requiring more biomarkers as evidence as the your efficacy of your drugs. I think if one could actually align those and make a vertical integration from very early stage data all the way up to the patient level, I think that will actually be one of the keys in going forward.
So one of the things that you talk about is the rate at which it's changing or growing or improving. I don't know if it's improving, but moving, and that it's getting faster and faster. So how do you stay ahead of that? How do you stay current when things are moving that quickly? And will it continue on that? What's your guess? Is it going to stay this fast? Is it going to go faster? Is it? How do you take advantage of that and not get left behind because of that?
I guess I get to start. I think start with that. I think drug discovery, the rate is not necessarily determined by, I think, the process itself, but it's much more governed by the FDA rates. So I think we at least enjoy to some extent. But having said that, because of the speed in which all the feedback loops are now happening, I think you could take a more smarter approach in terms of how you interpret the data for each stage as you develop. And I think in those terms, not necessarily the rate per se, I think the rate of mistakes might come down, which overall might then allow for more acceleration of processes to become successful.
Yeah, and I would add that you kind of have to be discerning about where you focus in all of this new technology, and try to address the pain points that are driven by the market, and really apply technologies in a meaningful way, because innovation just for the sake of innovation is not necessarily going to make a difference for the customers that you're trying to bring your technology to. So understanding their needs deeply and how that can be met by these new enabling technologies, I think is the key to really prioritizing where to focus on that new innovation.
Yeah.
And as an investor,
Yeah,
how do you stay
yeah.
ahead of it?
Well,
Or
I mean,
with
I
it?
think that's the primary job, right? We invest in things that are going to come to a fruition maybe 5-7 years down the road. So I think we sort of see ourselves in some ways as futurists. And the way we do that, frankly, is the way anyone else does. That is, you look at sort of some of the major megatrends in science, technology, government, regulatory. Some trends go slower, some go faster, but I think you have to really look ahead. You can't look at what's happening today. You have to look, really 5 years down the road and make some predictions and look at some of the trends and figure out where things are going to be at that. So like I said, some things move slower than faster, but I think that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you'll be behind the curve.
The other thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is precision medicine, which is a hot topic these days, and how that is changing clinical practice, how that will be changing clinical practice, and how that impacts companies as you're moving forward into the market.
Well, sure. So we've been talking about precision medicine for 15 years at least, if not longer, if you remember. And I think there are a number of paths that is now finally coming, of age. And one of those, for example, is precision medicine around targeted therapeutics. So we know that many biologic drugs don't work very well. They're very potent, but they only work probably on average about 25% of the time in 25% of population. Let's put it this way. So the old medicine, where it was population medicine that made one pill work for everyone, is moving toward personalized medicine. That is, it has to be very focused on a personal level. And this trend has been going on now for a few years. Many of healthcare systems around the world actually don't pay for medications if it doesn't work. So the scientific or the technical counterpart to that is that, can you develop medicine that are specifically for certain populations or subset of population in this matter? And I think we're coming to an age where, by having the data, the background data, some of the data that WellSheet works on, some of the data that Hahn works on, and everything else is coming together where we're able to do that. So it's really becoming a reality. And the regulatory piece of it is catching up. They're realizing they need to catch up, and we see bits and pieces of news from FDA all the time about doing that, because it works for everyone. It works for the patient, for the healthcare system, for the insurance companies, and the FDA as well.
Oh.
Yeah, I could make a brief comment, and I'll attempt a definition of precision medicine. It's less my expertise than I think yours, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really to incorporate genomic indicators and really identifying exactly what treatment will benefit a particular individual rather than one size fits all type. So feel free to expand. But in my experience, the innovation in that area has been really exciting. I think there is an increasing focus of late on it as a developing space, and I think certainly the reimbursement models and need to catch up, play a little bit of catch up on the technology, and then also how you can actually get that incorporated into physician workflow and make a difference for the actual decision makers who are deciding what treatment a patient can receive.
I think when the precision medicine, I think kind of ties into this data set idea, in a sense that if you have these big data which you could analyze and actually match up, as Craig mentioned, the information regarding a patient or a particular diseases to the way you want to address it, I think now we're actually coming to a convergence where you could actually make what seems to be kind of out there idea into reality. For instance, Craig and I were talking about this, so our compound, even this morning we had our first proof of concept in Alzheimer's to work. So basically a mouse which cannot find its way around a maze with our compound actually does now. It actually looks like it's finding something, right? But the way we at least interpret that result is because we are basically targeting a specific protein within the system, which is only isolable in the brain and the fat tissue, right? But before we did not have that kind of data set available, it would not have been possible to actually address that specifically. But now, because of all the data pools that we could pull together and make sense of, now it's actually becoming possible that you could actually do these things in real time.
Shall we open it up to the floor? I think there's a couple of microphones. Does anybody have a couple of questions?
There?
We'll start over here. I'll pass the mic around and we'll get everyone's questions over time.
Hi, Peter Park. I work as a medical executive advisor in New York. Several of you mentioned innovation and the idea of convergence. The question I have is, in maybe 10 or 15, 20 years ago, where innovation came from seemed to be discrete. The researchers did research, hospitals knew about patients, drug companies developed therapeutics. Now you see hospitals becoming VCs, drug companies investing in patients, so it's all over the place. How do you identify innovation in that type of environment where there aren't discrete roles anymore?
Oh, yes. So I think we don't look to see necessarily where the innovation is coming from. We look to see what problem it solves, right? In other words, we think that looking where innovation is coming from is more closer to focusing on the solution rather than the problem. I teach in my class at Princeton that you really got to be in love with the problem, not the solution. The solution changes. So we tend to focus in a mega way, in a mega trend way, to look at some of the big problems are. And then if there are any solutions, whether they're coming from academics, hospitals, or anywhere, we just try to keep an open mind of, whether that addresses it or not. And sometimes it does come from hospitals. Sometimes it comes from folks who used to work in biopharm industry, who really understand, where the gaps are, where the problems are. But I have to say, you're right that when we analyze the solution, when we analyze the source of the innovation, we do see that those that are effective are coming from multidisciplinary backgrounds, for sure. And I think that, to your point, I think that people have recognized it both in academics and in the government, in which they put more weight on multidisciplinary research now than they did 10, 15 years ago.
Hey, I'm Ruthie. I'm a software engineer at Warby Parker. I was curious to get a little deeper into what each of you are working on right now. Could you maybe just go a little bit more into the kinds of problems you've been working on today or last week? Hahn, you touched a little bit about that, but I'm just kind of curious to go a little deeper into that.
So I guess I'll just start. So even right before we started this forum, I was designing compounds because we know that our first set of compounds that's pushing forward obviously has its, things that's coming out nicely, but we do know that there are a set of compounds we have tested which came later that are actually being more potent. But at the same time, there are some other questions that we need to address. One of the things is that the target we're working on basically has 8 different, I guess you could call it brother proteins, which in the same class, and we don't necessarily know right now how all that interplay is happening. So we have to make more set of compounds to design, make, and then see how all the interplay has an effect. For instance, we know that if you have 6 carbons, it's not as good if you make it 8 carbons. And then you could go the opposite, basically our potency increases. But at the same time, we know that if we make it too long, it's not as good. So for every given compound, we know that there's some optimals, but we don't know what changes are going to lead to what. So that's kind of, as a chemist, that's how I spend my day designing compounds and trying to figure out, how each compound would work.
Yeah, so from WellSheet's perspective, and that sounds really fascinating, by the way. So we recently closed our seed round with participation from BioAdvance. We've been running pilots of our technology at practices across the country to understand exactly what needs we're filling, what needs we could do better to really address. And so through those pilot studies that we've been conducting, we've learned a ton about how physicians conduct their workflow, really deep analysis about how they interact with their existing systems and how our system provides value as a layer on top, and where we can do better. And so with all of those findings, we've been working really hard. We've expanded the team with the recent round, and we've been working really hard to develop additional feature sets to be able to meet those needs in anticipation of wider scale rollouts in early next year. So the focus has been doubling down on the product and the benefits and making sure we have that product market fit.
Yeah, in particular to your question, very quickly, many of our companies that are into data science, computer science, they are working on both analysis of the data in healthcare, and also presenting that in a very efficient way to the healthcare providers of specific sectors. So those are the two big things we see from a computer science.
Not, oh.
Pete Tedesco, I'm a growth equity investor in healthcare technology businesses, and just wanted to ask you guys, from each of your perspectives, maybe, everyone kind of mentioned data and access to data and quality data being a accelerant of innovation in healthcare. From that perspective, do you guys feel that electronic medical records have actually been an accelerant or an impediment?
That's for you.
Great. Yeah,
Sure.
Clearly Craig may have an impediment.
So yeah, I can speak to that. So in many ways, they've been an impediment. However, from a data perspective, I actually think it's been tremendous. And if you think about it, just 10 years ago, it was 10% of doctors that were using electronic medical records. And the adoption has spiked to 95 or so % of physicians on EHRs. And this has been largely due to government incentives and penalties for adoption, as I'm sure you're well aware. And so it's an incredible expansion. And from that perspective, successful program. If the objective is adoption, they met it. Obviously, the solutions themselves have tons of flaws that really have a material impact on a day-to-day basis for physicians and the quality of care that they're able to provide to their patients, and obviously that's what we're addressing. But that data previously was on paper, right? Now it's in at least electronic format. It's not well standardized, it's not easily digestible, but it's there. And there's been an explosion in digital health funding, which I think is largely related to that factor, right? There's been immense interest in this space ever since that adoption started creeping up, because there's so much that Silicon Valley software companies can do now that would just have been completely infeasible previously. And so I think it's a tremendous step forward that we actually have electronic systems in healthcare. It's kind of a sad comment to say, but I'm optimistic about the future.
Yeah. Let me make a comment. There's always been a lot of data in healthcare. But what the healthcare practitioners want, they want actionable information. And I think today, for the first time in many years, we are seeing that data is being able to be presented to them in an actionable form, information that is for them easy to read within their workflow. And that's different from, that's actually very particular from one sector of subspecialty to another subspecialty. So the cardiologists, radiologists, oncologists, they want it in a very different way. So throw data at them is really useless. But we're not doing that now with some of the companies that are coming up, like WellSheet, like a few of other investments that we made. We are actually showing them very sort of end result, actionable information. I think that they really enjoy and like. No physician likes to use EHR, but they love to see actionable information.
Yeah.
Hi there, thanks for coming and speaking with us. Joe Bandon here. I work in manufacturing, so I'm less familiar with a lot of this, but very fascinated. And I was curious if you folks had particular resources, blogs, authors, or any other online resources that you like to follow to stay up to date and at the cutting edge of the space.
Too busy to read. I mean, I think there are a number of things that I follow. I look at some of the trends in the venture capital industry. I follow some of the blogs. I think there is not one single thing that I read every day. I just sort of follow the path of interesting information that I find on certain topics.
Yeah, I think Rock Health does a really good job of giving like an overview in a relatively scientific manner in terms of what funding trends there are and where companies are receiving investment and so I think if you're looking for something centralized, that's a good source.
Right. So there's PitchBook and Crunchbase. So PitchBook you actually have to pay for, but Crunchbase is free. Those two are good resources from that perspective.
This side?
Yeah, my name is Alan Ruckman, and I'm part of a seed investor group, but we don't participate much in life sciences. But still the question is, with the investor hat, particularly for Shahram and Craig as a receiver, valuation metrics with long timelines. What are the valuation metrics you use? Are they consistent with what your seekers of capital think of as the relevant valuation metrics? And Craig, you could speak specifically to your most recent round, whether you were using the same valuation metrics for yourself as the investor thought that they want to focus on.
You want me? We're sitting in the same room. So let me just say one thing. It's much better to be an entrepreneur today than an investor. I think valuations are extremely high, and that's because of the inflow of significant amount of capital that's being poured into the life sciences, and especially in digital health, by tech investors from both coasts. Any type of traditional valuation method, if you're asking for discounted cash flow, those are all out the door. It's all around comparables, who pays more for that and who has money, who doesn't. The valuations are higher in New York than San Francisco than anywhere in the country. So if I was an entrepreneur, I would try to raise one of those places. And it's just really, really high. Let me just tell you that the valuation we see today are double to triple than we saw 2 years ago. 2 years ago. So double to triple. The benchmarks are the market is supply of capital out there. That's it. There's what oversupply of capital out there. So you see seed capital firms popping up all over the country, so the supply is going up. But for any of them to be successful, these companies have to grow, be successful, and exit. Well, that's sort of constant. That doesn't change. So what happens is the valuation sort of bubble up, and they have gone up pretty much. I wouldn't say we are instead of a bubble, but they are very high. We look for deals that are reasonable and have promising technology.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You make it sound a little bit easy on the entrepreneur side. But I would say early stage seed investments, it's really difficult to quantify exactly the likelihood of success of a business model. But I think it's really important to show tangible market validation that there is an opportunity here that people are really willing to pay for. If you can provide evidence to that effect, and then in the healthcare space, market size is never an issue. So if you can prove that you have a technology that people are willing to pay for, that's one, and then that you're going to have some significant advantage that's going to protect you from other people taking that opportunity. I think at an early stage, the combination of those two and having the team to execute are probably the main factors that go into investment decision making. Plus, of course, supply and demand is going to influence the valuation.
What's particularly interesting to me is that you say that there's a lot of money, but you have money from overseas, which is interesting. If there's a lot of cash available for good companies, and still you're looking to overseas investors, which is just an interesting data point for me. Yeah.
Hi, folks. My name is Maxime. Graduated just a few months ago, entering this space. So we've heard an optimistic view on the future of life sciences and how data science in particular is coming in. But another way to put that might be that it's never been easier to generate hypotheses that will fail. So I wonder, from that perspective of skepticism, what trends, could you each choose one trend that is quite hyped up today, perhaps, that you are skeptical of?
Trends are skeptic.
Good coin.
I'll attempt it. So actually, Han and I were talking earlier about artificial intelligence, right, and its potential in the market. And obviously, we're in that space, and so I'm optimistic about it. But specifically, we were talking about its potential to replace doctors, right, and really have the fundamental shift in the way medicine is provided. The tremendously lower cost approach driven by technology, and we were talking about how if you're just looking at the technological aspects of this, that's realistic. It's not crazy. But given the way that healthcare is structured, the likelihood of that occurring in any near term is very low, I would say, and so you have to just always temper your expectations based on the really exciting developments on the technology side, actually being able to implement them, and it's not just the regulatory burdens that exist and the difficulty of innovating in the space. It's also driven by the consumer demands, right? So the vast majority of people who are consuming healthcare services are elderly, and they drive by far the majority of the costs in the country, and they're probably not going to be comfortable with Watson telling them what their diagnosis is. And so it's going to be driven by demand, and I think over time, when we're the ones receiving the majority of the services, that'll probably change.
I think I could mention a little bit from the early discovery phase is that I think Greg touched upon it a little bit in a sense, that he had a hard time gathering data, basically data size, right? So in terms of early discovery efforts, you need the data to actually build a training set. But typically, if you want to address a very novel biology, your training set's not going to work, right? Because that's already old biology or old targets, right? So I think this idea where you could do machine learning or artificial intelligence for at least related to early discovery of new novel biology or therapeutic areas. Right now, I think there's a little bit of hype in that area, but I think there's a lot of things to be solved and looked into before it actually makes that transition. And I guess the biggest thing is how do you extrapolate, right? If you're within the training set, it might work, but if you want to extrapolate out from the training set into something that's completely novel where no training set exists, like how do you address that area? I think that's where maybe the next phase of quote unquote machine learning or artificial intelligence might come in.
I think, I have no comments on that.
Hi, Matt Handel, class of '87, serial entrepreneur in small molecule therapeutics. I actually have a new company where we're doing a seed round. All three of you have been through seed rounds. Shahram, you have funded seed rounds. Any advice for entrepreneurs about what works, what doesn't?
Yeah, well, so I'm on both sides of the table. I have a company that raised seed round, and I also invest in seed capital. So I think that, if I'm going to put it in a couple sentences, is that, understand what problem you're solving, go after investors that understand that. So if most, I would say small molecule therapeutic investors, they want you, for example, to have a lot of data. not pretty pictures, not images. So if you're going after VCs that don't understand that or cannot follow the science, then don't spend time with them. So focus on a small subset of investors that really understand the space, and then you also study and understand where they're coming from, their background, and I think that's probably the most effective way of raising money. So this is my third company I raised money. My first company, I made about 50 to 60 pitches to 50, 60 VCs all around the country. This one I made 2. So, I think it's just, you've got to be very focused and exactly what they want. And if you make that match, it works.
So Crescenta is the third company that I've been involved with starting. And one of the things that at least I've learned is that when you're making the pitch, it always helps when you know when that VC when they went out and raised money, right? Which cycle they're in. So if you're the last person to pitch from that fund, it's going to be very difficult as opposed to if you're going to be one of the earlier ones. And now it's become, those data are a little more public and it's better to get access to. So obviously reading that cycle is important, and also one thing that's helped us is certain funds have kind of focus. So let's say if you have a certain venture firm which has an oncology focus, then maybe like the therapeutic area that we're in right now might not be the best fit because they have their own expert pools and key opinion leaders they tap into, which might not be available in certain cases. So I think those are kind of 2 things that.
Yeah, so my answer is probably significantly less applicable. I can speak to kind of the early career software startup perspective. And I would say that 3 things are critical. One is demonstrate commitment. So I think dropping out of Wharton, having skin in the game, investing my own money to get things off the ground was huge for attracting capital. 2, build something, and when you're building, focus on what you can build to demonstrate what I was talking about earlier, the validation of the opportunity that people are going to pay for the product. So make that the focus of your efforts when you're getting just something out there to get market reaction to. And then thirdly, and I think both of you guys alluded to this, is find the right investor. By far the hardest money that you're going to raise is the first money. And so it's important to find a fit for someone who really understands the space, also somebody who hopefully can provide value add and can justify bringing them in early when they're taking a big chance on the opportunity. If they feel that they can meaningfully contribute to your chances of success, it becomes a better relationship, I would say.
Time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. One from the left side of the room.
So the way that we, Katie Lancaster, I work for Optum in population health management. I'm curious to know the way that we pay for healthcare is changing on a lot of different axes. What are some of the reimbursement models that you think are coming? And for one area, whether it's technology or pharma, where do you think it should be going?
Really good question.
Value-based payment. I mean, everything is moving toward value-based payment. We see it start in orthopedic. Now it's going. It's just capturing the whole market. It eventually will go everywhere. I think that's really the true trend. Sometimes it'll go slower. Sometimes it'll go faster, depending on the politics of it. But I think that is definitely the trend. It is the true representation of how effective the medicine works, the patient care works. That's it.
Yeah.
No.
No.
I think there might be a little soul searching that needs to happen, right? So for instance, hepatitis C, if you take that as an example, obviously I might not know all the details, but if you think that basically like even 5 years ago, nothing existed, now basically I think the understanding is that it's a completely curable disease, right? Which means that if you have already cured all the patients up to date, right, if the drug is made available, then what people now would have to think is if you actually treat and completely cure disease, is there actually a business going to be there, right? So I'm not probably answering your question per se, but from a pure business perspective, I think it would be something that, especially people who are trying to actually treat a disease wouldn't necessarily have to think about going forward. And on top of that, it becomes important because the life cycle in terms of getting, let's say for instance, if we take our example, let's say if we think this molecule is going to treat Alzheimer's, right? 10 years down the road, it would basically, would hit the market and maybe become available. But one thing, this is a little exception, but if you're in a market where there's already things out there already like 5 years in advance, and then maybe the treatment for that particular disease might completely change, which like for immuno-oncology, like cisplatin for certain cancers right now is the standard care, but maybe 5 years down the road, people not even consider this. So if you're developing something that's going to work with cisplatin, there's no need for actually to do those kind of work, right? So if that's the case, the reimbursement model today is going to completely be different from, let's say, 5 years down the road. And whether, if you come up with a reimbursement model now that would work 5 years down the road, would be completely different. So it's going to be a very, I think, moving target going forward, especially as we come up with more drugs that is actually curing. And I think that's something that we all have to kind of be concerned about.
Yeah, I would just agree with Shahram. It's on value-based payment, but I would just make the point that the ultimate corroboration of your point that value-based payment is real is that there hasn't been talk of reversing it with the change in administration, from what I understand. And if that holds, then it's on, right? So.
Thank you. So Ed Shin, Pharma. Probably a personal question for the speakers. So trying to think about at what point you decided to take the plunge. So with Craig, at what point you felt your idea was good enough to drop out?
Yeah.
With Hahn, I don't know how you survived putting 2 jobs down. And then Shahram, based on your experience, at what point, maybe it's personal, like what time is your solution ready?
I think it's very personal. So, I was in a corporate world. My second corporate job after 5 years, I was the head of business development for Siemens, and I felt like, I want to move faster, and I want to make things happen quicker and make something significant happen. And I felt that, particularly it's okay to fail. I think once you come to the realization that you need to try something and it's okay if it doesn't work, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there is, the sun's going to come up again. And I think once you accept that, then it's much easier sort of to take the plunge and do that. With some planning, I wasn't, what do we call it, early in career? I wasn't necessarily early, I was a little bit older, but that was mine.
So for me, it was actually by kind of, it was kind of by accident, because the first company I started out, it was basically an extension of what my postdoctoral work was. And then we were kind of convinced that we should start a company based on that idea. But having said that, so originally, if you had asked me, let's say in 2007, I was only thinking about going to academics, right? But then when I took a step back and thought about, what are the big impacts that one could make, that could be, so you could go into academics or you start this, but and one big thing for me was also that the interactions that would have been allowed, right? So like, and all the new openings that could come with the opportunity, I think there was a big thing, not necessarily, the science obviously was there, at the same time, the different type of people that I would get to interact with. And I thought that would kind of be a very add value to my career as well. So a combination of those.
Yeah, and I would agree. It's definitely a deeply personal decision, and at least for me, probably not a perfectly rational one. A framework that Jeff Bezos recommends for this is regret minimization. So when you're 80, what are you going to regret the least? What path in your career? Take that one. During that summer between first and second year of business school, we received a federal grant and it's got some good traction. So that was an important factor. Some of the trends that we were hoping would occur on the technology side were materializing, and so the timing, I think, is critical. A lot of your success is going to be determined by how well you time the market. And so paying close attention to those indicators. I also had an extraordinarily supportive wife who put up with me during it. So that was very, very helpful in the decision-making process as well.
Can I have one thing? So during the decision-making process, one quote that actually stood out and maybe have changed my career path, I guess, was I was listening to some videos on YouTube, and apparently, like when Henry Kissinger left the State Department to go to Harvard, after like a couple of years, I guess it was kind of offsetting. Like he made a comment saying, some of you might have heard this, the competition in academics is so fierce because the stakes are so small. I mean, I guess there's some context behind why he actually made that comment, but the reason it stood out for me is not that academics is bad or anything, but the decision-making process actually needs to take account of what is the big stakes, right? And for me at the time, the science that I was working on and the way it could actually impact, the business was actually providing very novel chemical matter to be used as inputs for discovery in big pharma, right? So if I can make an impact in the discovery engine of big pharma drug discovery, I thought that would be a big impact. So that's basically the reason, the global reason why I decided to take the plunge, because the question I thought was big enough.
We will end the formal portion of the panel now. I'd like to thank each of the panelists and Anne-Marie for a very illuminating discussion. Please join me in thanking these folks. On behalf of Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, we have a small gift for each of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hahn.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
For you as well. So before we break for a networking reception at which all of you are welcome to enjoy the panelists on an informal basis, each other, and lots of food and drink. Just wanted to close with some upcoming events, not now until 2018, but just to highlight a couple things. One, Anne-Marie mentioned the official opening of the Princeton Innovation Center is on January 2nd, when our first tenant, Hahn, moves in,
Okay.
which is really exciting.
News to me.
I didn't tell you the date yet.
So now he's really obligated to make that move, right? The next TigerTalks, the turnout here is just fabulous, and the continuous demand shown by alumni to get together and to talk about and listen to different entrepreneurial topics tells us we want to obviously continue this. The February 22nd event will be on cryptocurrencies, and we have both faculty and several alumni startup founders in a very intriguing space, to say the least, talking about that trend. Then we're actually going to take TigerTalks on the road, And we're going to do a couple of events in concert with corporate engagement out on the West Coast in probably January and then again in April. And then finally, I mentioned the Alumni Entrepreneurs Fund. The next application process, it actually ends, doesn't begin, on April 1st. So if you are a early career kind of alumnus with a great idea that's already beginning to find some traction, at least in your mind, if not in the marketplace, think about applying to the AEF because it's a very fabulous source of both money, but also mentorship. With that, all the panelists will be staying with us for about another hour. Please enjoy the food. Again, thank you to WeWork, and great to see everyone.
Thank you.